Our story began on a bright, sunny day, filled with promises of new beginnings. The scent of blooming flowers filled the air, and birds sang joyfully as they welcomed the dawn of a new day. I was filled with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation, knowing that today was the day I would marry Jack, the love of my life. From the moment I met Jack, I knew there was something special about him. His gentle smile, his kind eyes, and the way he made me feel as if I were the only person in the world. We connected on a level that was both profound and simple, understanding each other's thoughts and dreams. As I stood before the mirror, adjusting my veil and taking in the reflection of the woman about to embark on a new journey, my best friend and maid of honor, Emily, came into the room. "You look stunning, Linda," she said, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "Thank you, Em," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "I can't believe this day is finally here." "You and Jack are perfect for each other," Emily assured me, wrapping her arms around me. "I know you'll be incredibly happy together." Her words filled me with warmth, and I knew she was right. Jack and I were meant to be. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with love and laughter. Our friends and family gathered to celebrate our union, their faces glowing with genuine happiness. Jack looked handsome in his tailored suit, his eyes twinkling with joy as he took my hand. "Do you, Linda, take Jack to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the minister asked, his voice filled with solemnity. "I do," I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. "And do you, Jack, take Linda to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Jack said, squeezing my hand reassuringly. Our vows were exchanged, our rings placed, and our love sealed with a kiss. It was the beginning of the rest of our lives. However, not all was as perfect as it seemed. Among the sea of smiling faces, there was one that seemed out of place. Jack's mother, Mrs. Robinson, stood in the corner, her lips pressed into a thin line and her eyes filled with something that I couldn't quite place. During the reception, she approached me, her voice dripping with insincerity. "Linda, dear, it's so lovely to meet you," she said, her eyes scanning me up and down. "I must say, I expected someone different for my son." "Thank you, Mrs. Robinson," I replied, struggling to keep my composure. "I hope to make Jack as happy as he makes me." She said, her eyes narrowing. "We'll see about that. Jack has always had high standards. I hope you can live up to them." Her words were like ice, and I could feel the happiness of the day slipping away. I forced a smile and excused myself, feeling a sinking feeling in my stomach. I told myself that it didn't matter, that her opinion was unimportant, but her words stuck with me, casting a shadow over what should have been the happiest day of my life. As the day turned into night, Jack and I danced, and I tried to forget about Mrs. Robinson. Jack's love was all that mattered, and I knew that we could face anything together. But even as we swayed to the music, her words lingered, a haunting reminder that not everyone was happy about our union. Our blissful beginning was marred by her presence, but I was determined not to let her ruin our love. Little did I know that her words were just the beginning of a nightmare that would test our love and change our lives forever. The excitement of the wedding soon gave way to the gentle routines of daily life. Jack and I settled into our cozy little house, filled with love and the dreams of a shared future. Our days were punctuated by laughter, loving glances, and the bliss of each other's company. It didn't take long for me to fall into the rhythm of being a wife, preparing meals for us, decorating our home, and taking care of all the little things that made our house a home. Jack was supportive and loving, always appreciating my efforts and contributing his share as well. However, there was a dark cloud that loomed over our idyllic life. Mrs. Robinson. The nagging and negative energy that she brought into our home during her frequent visits began to wear on me. Her snide remarks and criticisms were impossible to ignore. One evening, As we sat down for dinner, Mrs. Robinson arrived unannounced. I tried to welcome her with a smile, but her immediate comment took me aback. "Linda, dear, this table setting is all wrong." "How could you not know how to properly set a table?" she snapped, rearranging the silverware. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Robinson. I thought it looked nice," I stammered, feeling my cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Clearly you have much to learn," she replied, her tone dripping with condescension. Later that night, after Mrs. Robinson had left, I broke down in tears. Jack held me, trying to comfort me. "She's just set in her ways, love," he said, stroking my hair. "Don't take it to heart." "But Jack, it's never ending," I sobbed. "She finds fault with everything I do. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells whenever she's around." "I know it's hard, Linda," he said softly, "but she's my mother, and we have to find a way to get along with her." His words were well-intentioned, but they didn't ease my frustration. I knew he was caught in a difficult position, but it was becoming unbearable for me. The situation escalated when Mrs. Robinson came to our house one day with her suitcases in tow. Her announcement that she was moving in sent shockwaves through me. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice rising. "You can't just move in without discussing it with us first." "It's settled then," Mrs. Robinson said smugly, ignoring my protests. "I'll be staying in the guest room." "But, Mother, don't you think we should talk about this first?" Jack interjected, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Nonsense, Jack," she snapped. "I'm your mother, and this is where I belong." I felt trapped, caught in a situation that was spiraling out of control. The cozy home that Jack and I had built was being invaded, and I felt powerless to stop it. As the days turned into weeks, Mrs. Robinson's presence became a constant source of tension and resentment. Her demands, her criticisms, and her complete disregard for my feelings were suffocating. Jack and I tried to keep the peace, to find a balance, but the strain was beginning to show. The bliss of our new life was being overshadowed by the dark cloud of Mrs. Robinson's influence. As we struggled to maintain our love and happiness, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a battle, one that would test our relationship and our resolve. The seeds of discontent were sown, and I knew that the storm was coming. Life had taken a dark turn. Our home, once filled with love and laughter, had become a battleground. Mrs. Robinson's incessant nagging, her constant criticism, and her total lack of respect for my place in our home were grinding me down. Her presence was like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over everything. Simple tasks like cooking or cleaning became sources of anxiety as I anticipated her next critical remark or demeaning comment. One day, as I was preparing lunch, she walked into the kitchen, her eyes immediately scanning for something to find fault with. "You're cutting those vegetables all wrong, Linda," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Haven't you learned anything about cooking by now?" "I'm doing the best I can, Mrs. Robinson," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jack seems to enjoy my cooking just fine." "That's because he doesn't know any better," she sneered. "But don't worry, I'll teach you how to cook properly. It's the least I can do for my poor son." Her words were like daggers, cutting deep into my self-esteem. I felt small, insignificant, and trapped. Jack tried to mediate, but it only seemed to make things worse. One night, after another unbearable day, I broke down in front of him. "I can't take it anymore. Jack," I sobbed, "I feel like I'm losing myself. Your mother treats me like a servant, not like your wife." "I know it's hard, Linda," he said, holding me close. "But she's my mother, and I can't just turn her away." "You're choosing her over me," I cried, pulling away from him. "Don't you see what she's doing to us?" "Linda, please try to understand," he pleaded, his voice filled with desperation. "I'm caught in the middle here. I love you both, but Jack, love isn't supposed to feel like this," I said, my voice breaking. I feel like I'm drowning, and you're not doing anything to save me." We sat in silence, the weight of our situation settling over us like a heavy blanket. Our love was being tested, stretched to its limits, and I didn't know how much more I could take. The days turned into weeks, and the situation only worsened. Mrs. Robinson's behavior became more erratic, her demands more unreasonable. She would order me around like a maid, expecting me to wait on her hand and foot. Her cruel words became more personal, more cutting. "You'll never be good enough for my son," she spat one day, her eyes filled with malice. "You're a poor excuse for a wife. I don't know what he ever saw in you." Her words struck me like a physical blow, and I retreated to our bedroom, tears streaming down my face. I felt defeated, broken, and utterly alone. Jack's attempts to placate his mother were futile, and I could see the strain it was putting on him. Our relationship was fraying at the edges, the trust and intimacy replaced by resentment and frustration. I knew that something had to change, that we couldn't go on like this. But the fear of losing Jack, the fear of being alone, kept me paralyzed. As I lay in bed one night, unable to sleep, I realized that I had to take control of my life. I had to find a way to stand up for myself, to reclaim my identity, and to save my marriage. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that the battle was far from over, but I was ready to fight, ready to take back my life. Our home had become a living nightmare, but I was determined to wake up and take control of my destiny. No matter what it took, I was ready to face the storm and come out on the other side, stronger and more resilient. Little did I know, the storm was about to take a dark and dangerous turn, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and revenge. The tension in our home had reached its zenith, and I felt as though I was standing on a precipice, staring into an abyss. Mrs. Robinson's malicious behavior escalated, her insults becoming more vitriolic, her demands more ludicrous. One morning, after having prepared breakfast, I presented the plates, only to have her dismiss my efforts with a wave of her hand. "What is this slop?" she sneered, pushing her plate away. "I thought I taught you how to cook something decent." "Mrs. Robinson, I tried to make it just how you like it," I said, my voice trembling. "Tried. Clearly you failed," she spat. Jack's face went red, and for the first time, he stood up to his mother. "Mother, enough. Linda has done nothing but try to please you. It's time you show her some respect." Mrs. Robinson's face twisted into a mask of rage. "Respect? For her, she's destroying our family, and you're too blind to see it." "I'm not blind." "Mother," Jack said, his voice firm, "what I see is you treating my wife with nothing but contempt. This has to stop." The room was filled with a heavy silence, the air thick with tension. Mrs. Robinson's eyes narrowed, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. "What has she done to you, Jack?" she finally said, her voice dripping with malice. "How has she twisted you against me?" "Mother, no one has twisted me against you," Jack replied, his voice cracking with emotion. "But you are tearing us apart. We can't continue like this." The confrontation was a turning point, a moment of clarity that made me realize that I had to take drastic action. I had to reclaim my life, my marriage, and my dignity. Jack's willingness to stand up to his mother gave me the strength to make a decision. I needed to find a way to bring peace to our home, to mend the rift that had formed between us. And then came the day of Mrs. Robinson's birthday. I knew that it was a chance to extend an olive branch, to try and mend fences. I carefully selected a beautiful piece of jewelry, hoping that the gesture would be a step towards reconciliation. But the birthday celebration turned into a disaster. As we sat down at the dinner table, I nervously handed her the gift, trying to put on a brave smile. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Robinson," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She took the box and opened it, her eyes widening as she saw the jewelry inside. Then, without a word, she tossed it aside. "I don't need this cheap thing," she snapped, her eyes filled with disdain. "Mother!" Jack exclaimed, his face pale with shock. Without another word, she struck me across the face, her eyes blazing with anger. "You think this will make up for everything you've done? You think this will buy my love?" I stumbled back, tears welling in my eyes. The room spun, and I felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under me. The humiliation, the pain, the betrayal, it was all too much. "That's it," I said, my voice filled with determination. "I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving." "Linda, please, let's talk about this," Jack pleaded, his eyes filled with fear. "No, Jack," I said, shaking my head. "I need to be alone." And with that, I left, my heart breaking, my mind reeling. The breaking point had come, and I knew that things could never be the same. As I walked towards my friend's house, my thoughts were a whirlwind of emotion. I knew that I had to find a way to heal, to rebuild, and to find my strength. But little did I know. The storm was far from over, and the darkest hour was yet to come. The phone call that awaited me would change everything, unraveling a web of deceit that would challenge everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and revenge. My mind was a storm of emotions as I sought refuge at my friend's house. The events of the day were too much to bear. I needed space to think, to heal, but fate had other plans. About an hour after my departure, my phone rang. It was a number I recognized all too well, and my heart sank as I answered. "Linda!" It was Mrs. Robinson, her voice filled with panic and tears. "It's Jack. He's fallen unconscious, and I don't know what to do." "What?" I exclaimed, fear gripping my heart. "What happened?" "I don't know," she sobbed. "He just collapsed. Please come home. I don't know what to do." Without a second thought, I rushed home, my mind racing, terror consuming me. As I arrived, I found Mrs. Robinson in a state of complete disarray, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Where is he?" I demanded, rushing past her. "In the living room," she stammered, following me. I found Jack sprawled on the floor, unconscious, his face pale. I immediately called an ambulance and began performing key PR, praying that it wasn't too late. "Why didn't you call an ambulance?" I screamed at Mrs. Robinson, my anger rising. "What were you thinking?" I didn't know what to do," she stammered, her eyes wide with fear. "I was so scared, Linda." "You should have called for help," I yelled, my heart pounding in my chest. "What if he doesn't make it because of your delay?" The paramedics arrived, taking over the key PR and quickly transporting Jack to the hospital. I followed, my mind in turmoil, fear and anger battling within me. At the hospital, the doctors worked diligently to stabilize Jack. After what felt like an eternity, they informed me that his condition was most likely caused by a substance that someone had put in his glass. "What do you mean, a substance?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Are you saying he was poisoned?" "It appears so," the doctor replied gravely. "We're doing everything we can to flush it out of his system, but we need to find out what it was to provide the best treatment." A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized the implication of his words. I looked at Mrs. Robinson, her face ashen, her eyes filled with guilt. "Did you do this?" I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. She broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to poison you," she sobbed. "I wanted to get rid of you, but I must have mixed up the glasses. I never meant to hurt my son." "You monster!" I screamed, my body shaking with anger. "How could you?" "I'm sorry," she wailed, falling to her knees. "I didn't mean to. Please don't tell the police. Please, Linda." "You're sorry?" I spat, my voice filled with disbelief. "You tried to kill me, and you almost killed your son. You will pay for this one way or another. As the reality of the situation sunk in, I knew that I had to make a choice. I had to find a way to deal with Mrs. Robinson, to bring her to justice, and to protect my husband. The dark web of deceit was unraveling, and I knew that the battle was far from over. Revenge was on the horizon, and I was ready to take control of my destiny. But first, I had to focus on Jack's recovery, to be there for him, and to find the strength to move forward. The poisoning was a turning point, a dark chapter in our lives that would change everything. And as I stood by Jack's bedside, holding his hand, I knew that our love would be tested like never before. The storm was raging, and I was ready to face it head on, determined to find the truth, to seek justice, and to reclaim our lives. The days following Jack's poisoning were filled with a mixture of fear, anger, and determination. His recovery was slow but steady, and as he regained consciousness, I knew it was time to confront the woman who had nearly destroyed our lives. With a heavy heart, I returned home to face Mrs. Robinson, knowing that I had to get a full confession from her. As I walked through the door, I found her huddled in a corner, her face pale, her eyes filled with terror. "Sit down, Mrs. Robinson," I said coldly, my voice devoid of emotion. "We need to talk." I can explain," she stammered, tears in her eyes. "No," I said, cutting her off. "You will listen to me, and then you will tell me everything. Every detail." She nodded, her body trembling, and I began to recount the horrifying events of the poisoning, my voice steady, my eyes never leaving hers. "You almost killed your son," I said, my voice breaking. "You tried to murder me, and you nearly took the life of the only person you have left in this world. How could you?" I was angry. She sobbed, her voice barely a whisper. "I was jealous. I wanted you gone. I thought that if you were out of the picture, Jack and I could be a family again." "A family?" I spat, my anger rising. "By killing me? By hurting the person you claim to love?" "I never meant to hurt Jack," she cried, her body racked with sobs. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "But it did happen," I said, my voice cold. "And now you have to face the consequences." "I'll do anything," she pleaded, falling to her knees. "Please, Linda, don't turn me in. I'll leave. I'll never bother you again. Just please don't destroy what's left of my life." I looked at her, my mind torn. On one hand, I wanted to see her pay for her crimes. On the other, I knew that turning her in would create a media circus and further traumatize Jack. "You will leave," I said finally, my voice firm. "You will pack your things and you will never come near us again. You will never speak to Jack, never contact us in any way. You will disappear. And if I ever hear from you again, I will not hesitate to go to the police." Mrs. Robinson nodded, her face ashen, her body defeated. "I'll do it," she whispered. "I'll go." As she packed her things, I watched her, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I knew that I was doing what was best for Jack, for our family, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was letting her off too easily. "Goodbye, Mrs. Robinson," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, as she walked out the door. "I hope you find the peace you need to live with what you've done." As the door closed behind her, I felt a mixture of relief and emptiness. The nightmare was over, but the scars would remain. I knew that I had to focus on Jack's recovery, to rebuild our lives, and to find the strength to move forward. But as I stood in the silence of our home, I couldn't help but feel that something had changed, that a part of me had been lost forever. The confession was a turning point, a moment of clarity that allowed me to take control of my destiny, but it was also a reminder of the darkness that lurked within, the capacity for evil that existed in those we thought we knew. As I looked out the window, watching Mrs. Robinson's car disappear into the distance, I knew that I had taken the first step towards healing, towards reclaiming my life. But the journey was far from over, and I knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, with pain, and with the strength to overcome. The confession was a beginning, a chance to start anew, but it was also a stark reminder of the fragility of trust, the complexity of love, and the power of revenge.